You're listening to the HR Happy Hour Network, sponsored by WorkHuman. These days, it feels like there isn't much good to go around in the world of work. But WorkHuman knows when we celebrate the good in each of us, we bring out the best in all of us. It's why they created the world's #1 employee recognition platform. And they didn't stop there, combining rich recognition data with AI to create human intelligence, so you can get uniquely good insights into performance, skills, engagement, and more. To learn more about how you can join their force for good, go to workhuman.com or check out their own podcast, How We Work, which explores the trends, issues, relationships, and experiences that shape our workplaces. This episode of At Work America is sponsored by Paychex, one of the leading providers of HR, payroll, retirement, and insurance solutions for businesses of all sizes. Listeners, quick question for you. How prepared is your business for a surprise I-9 audit? If that question made your stomach drop, you're not alone. Even if all your employees are authorized to work, small errors on your I-9 paperwork could lead to fines that rack up into the thousands. And that's where our friends from Paychex come in. With audits on the rise, they've got a free on-demand webinar called I-9 Audits and ICE Raids, What Employers Need to Know to Stay Protected. It's a step-by-step guide to help you protect your business from expensive fines, stress, and confusion. Don't wait until it's too late. Watch it today at paychex.com/AWIA. That's paychex.com/AWIA. It only takes 45 minutes to gain peace of mind. Welcome to the At Work in America show. My name's Steve Oates. Great to be here today. I want to say hello and shout out to Trish Steed. A little bit under the weather today, so she couldn't make it with us today, but we are thinking about her and hope she's doing well. I am very excited, though, today to welcome to the show Dr. Nick Taylor. He's a clinical psychologist and the CEO of Unmind. And if you're not familiar with Unmind, you really should be. They're one of the most innovative, interesting, and kind of game-changing companies. I don't think it's even fair to say, like, it's too limiting to say in the HR tech space, because I think that's not really a fair description of what Unmind does. And Nick can tell us a little bit more about it. But Unmind, a really innovative company doing incredible work with mental health in the workplace. So, Nick, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again. And how are you?
Oh, Steve, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very well, thank you. I'm in Napa, which I think is one of the most beautiful parts of the world. I've been speaking about AI and mental health to a lot of the HR community, and just feeling energized, actually, to be in such a beautiful place and to be talking about such interesting things. So, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. And yeah, and I was just thinking about, as I was welcoming you to the show, I was thinking, I don't really want to call this an HR tech company, because when we say HR tech, it's like, we think about, payroll and benefit, and some of those, I don't know, just transactional things, which are important. And don't get me wrong, I love all our supporters who do that stuff. But this is a bigger picture conversation, I think, and a really important one as well. And maybe just, Nick, for the folks who are tuning in and maybe not familiar with Unmind, give us, 60, 90 seconds, as long as you want, a little bit of the backstory of Unmind, maybe a little bit of your story too, because I'm familiar with it, but it's quite an interesting story as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that, hearing you talk about it's not really just HR tech, because of course this topic is so critical, the topic of mental health. The World Health Organization talks about mental health as a basic human right. And it's really critical that organizations are really protecting the human rights of their employees, who are obviously the absolute heartbeat of their organizations. So my background, I'm a clinical psychologist. Prior to founding Unmind, I was leading health teams in the UK's National Health Service as a frontline clinician. And I became really frustrated with the fact that I was meeting people too late when they were seeking care. And it was making my job harder, and it was meaning that the people seeking care were not getting better soon enough. And I became really fascinated by, well, what would it mean? What would it take to get to a preventative place with mental health and to be able to do early intervention really well? So I stepped back from that role and stepped back from my teaching roles at universities, and I started Unmind with my co-founder, Steve Peralta, and we were really deeply passionate about creating an organization that focused on prevention and early intervention in mental health care, really helping to rebrand, to break the stigma around the topic. That was human led, but used digital tools to scale.
Yeah.
That was very scientific and data driven, and finally only focused in on the workplaces, because organizations have both a huge problem to solve, which is mental illness is the leading cause of absenteeism, presenteeism, and staff turnover, but also an enormous opportunity, which is that when our people are well, our business will thrive.
Right.
So it's a kind of really a double-edged opportunity. So that was about 8 years ago now. We're headquartered in London. We have offices in New York and Sydney, and we work with some of the most incredible global organizations, helping them to transform their approach to mental health and providing their employees with tools to get timely access to mental health care, and also helping turn the topic of mental health into more of a performance topic and educating leaders to understand it in that way as well. So it's been really exciting seeing the transformation in the space, but I think there's a lot more we can be doing, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you about it today.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for that reset, and I appreciate that. And I recall when the first time we met was probably 7 or 8 years ago when you guys came onto the scene, and I remember that what was distinctive to me at the time was the focus on prevention and early intervention. I guess, Nick, I'll ask, is it not dissimilar then to, some of the physical conditions we're all familiar with, whether it's hypertension, cancer, other things that we always hear about? Oh, catch it early, and you can have a much better chance of recovery, right? With those things we're much more familiar with. Is it similar with anxiety, stress, burnout, other mental health conditions? Early intervention is really key to helping people sort of stay well or get well?
Yeah, it's true of all healthcare.
Okay.
Firstly, prevention and cure, and secondly, the right care at the right time is critical to the right outcomes.
Yeah.
And there's no better time than early. So it really is a case of working on things as soon as they show up. It's really important as well that we distinguish the topics here, because there's mental health, which is something we all have all of the time. From the moment we're born to the moment we die, we have mental health. And every human that's ever lived has had mental health for their whole life. And it's actually a really beautiful thing. It's our ability to make decisions, form relationships, contribute to our community, and feel all the emotions we feel. And then there's mental illness, which is what happens when our mental health goes wrong.
Okay.
And most mental illnesses, there's the odd exception, but the vast majority, you don't go into bed on Monday night and wake up with no symptoms of depression and then wake up on Tuesday morning with clinical depression. It happens over time.
Yeah.
You pick up symptoms and eventually it gets to the stage where it could be diagnosed as a mental illness. And that between that kind of moment when it starts to occurring to when it becomes a clinical issue, there's a huge opportunity to intervene then, because that can prevent the problem from getting worse.
Yeah, and the key there, thank you, Nick. And the key there is, I think, for folks is to be more aware of it, to understand that it might be happening. And as we have talked about for a lot of years in this space, understanding the options that are available to you as an employee, both as an organization as well, to start those interventions when they're needed. And we've talked for a long time in the mental health in the workplace space about two things really we'll talk about, I think, before we get into some of the real interesting things that are happening around the technology as well. One is stigma, right? And I feel like we've been talking about that for a long time. And I'm sad I read some of the stats in the Unmind 2025 Workplace Mental Health Trends Report, which I will put a link to in the show notes, which is a really interesting read for folks who are trying to get their arms around this topic in 2025. But like the stigma around, hey, there's still, maybe it's half, it's still a pretty good percentage of folks who don't really feel prepared, capable, open enough in their organization to even start having conversations there. And I'm saddened a little bit that we're still talking about that. And I'd love for your thoughts on that side of it before we start talking about some of the tools.
I mean, it's a great topic, right? And if there was a magic wand, it would be removing stigma around this topic. Let's just take a step back and think about when we talk about mental health, and then we talk about mental illness, and we talk about people getting the right care at the right time. Well, what does that actually in practice mean? And if you were to take, there's various organizations have reported on this to varying degrees, but I thought McKinsey did a good job in 2023 when they showed that 1% of a workplace population is going to need intervention for a severe mental illnesses.
Okay.
24% are going to need support for moderate presentations of anxiety and depression, for example. And a whopping 75% of the population needs to be focusing on promotion of well-being and that kind of more preventative position. So when we're talking about breaking the stigma, it's really important to think about the language we use when we're engaging that 75% and 24% and 1%, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's step out of mental health for a moment and try and take some learnings from other areas of healthcare. Let's think about dentistry for a moment. When you're in dentistry, it's probably the best example of preventative healthcare in any area of healthcare. And the majority of us are focused on prevention most of the time. We're waking up in the morning, we're brushing our teeth, we're flossing, we're going to bed, we're doing the same thing, right? It's prevention. Have you ever bought a dental product with a picture of bad teeth?
Yeah, I'm thinking no, right? They're usually like,
right.
Boom, these glowing white,
Beautiful white teeth, beautiful white teeth. You think about sunscreen, right? When you put sunscreen on when you go on vacation, the picture for the product is a picture of somebody on a beach having a great time.
Yeah.
It's not a picture of somebody with skin cancer, right? So the point I'm making here is like, we're saying prevention is better than cure, and that 75% of the population need to be promoting we need to be promoting their well-being. Then we need to speak to that group in a more aspirational, energetic way, because that's what we do in prevention. We sell dentistry with perfect teeth. We sell sunscreen with great holidays or vacations.
Sure.
And in mental health, the opportunity is amazing. Mental health is a beautiful topic. So we need to be reminding people about the opportunity. And this is just basic marketing, but it's also basic psychology. The approach avoidance theory. Human beings, like all animals, avoid things that scare them and are drawn to things which excite them. So for too long now in the topic of mental health, we've been saying the right things around prevention, early intervention, but we've been delivering it with the wrong message, which is that we talk too much about the negative problem space to the majority of well people, and that perpetuates stigma. What we need to be doing is unleashing the topic of mental health away from being just about problems, which is how most people understand it, towards understanding it as a performance topic, which is that if we work on our mental health, we can have a more fulfilling life. We can reach our potential. We can have better relationships. All of these positive things that draw us in. And it actually helps to ease the conversation into normality. And by doing that, what happens is that we start being able to speak more openly when problems do start occurring, because it's more normalized in the discourse of our society.
Yeah. Nick, thank you. I think that's a great way to discuss the topic, because if we're looking, I was thinking about, there's some really interesting data in the report about EAP programs here, which are very common and popular, but I always made a joke around every single marketing piece I ever saw for an EAP in my entire life had a picture on it. And for folks who are listening only in the video, I'm like, it's a person bent over at their desk, clutching their temples, like with the furrowed brow, right? It's that photo, right, of the person just, oh, I'm struggling here while I'm trying to, work on this spreadsheet or whatever they're doing, right? And
often, by the way, often in black and white. Right? And I've never met as a clinician, I've never met anyone in black and white. So I don't know what point we thought that was a good representation. But you're absolutely right. But even the name Employee Assistance Program fails to address the topic properly. It's just not. Mental health just got to brand itself in a smarter way, and it's not just a branding thing. This is, if you went away and read the definition of mental health from the World Health Organization, it's an incredibly cool topic, and it's a privilege to have mental health, and we need to tell that story more.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that will change or is changing, and we see some of this in the 2025 Workplace Mental Health Trends Report, is it's going to be driven by some of the younger generations, right? And being certainly more open to probably being more open to discussing anything, really, quite frankly, just due to the nature of the culture that they've grown up in and how it's changed so much, but also just willing to talk about these topics more openly, talk about them at their employer, evaluate an employer based on their perceived or real support for employee mental health. So I think some of that is changing, because I think, I'm certainly old enough to know when I entered the workforce, the professional workforce, I never would have thought it was okay for me to approach my manager or even a colleague and discuss anything around my mental health if I were having a problem. But I think that that's starting to change, and it's probably led by the younger folks.
Oh, for sure. I'm really inspired by the younger workforce coming into the workplace. And I think that that generation has actually had to deal with a lot more exposure to potentially psychologically damaging things taking place at a much younger age,
Yeah.
be it growing up during COVID and the pandemic, or be it social media, or online life, and or coming into the world of work when there's been many years now of uncertainty and all the economic challenges being young growing up kind of present. So that generation has actually helps us as a world talk more openly about mental health, and not always perfectly, right? I think that there's also a risk that some of the clinical language has been normalized into descriptions of everyday life with mental health, and that's not so helpful. But there's a general trend that generation, I think, is more enlightened than some of the older generations, and their expectations around what the workforce delivers to them is also greater, right? So that, one of the things in the report was saying that 88% of 18 to 24-year-olds say workplace therapy or coaching is really
Yeah.
important to them, in comparison to only 66% who are 55 to 64%, which, by the way, is also a good percentage, right?
Yeah, it's not
And
bad,
shows
right?
that everyone wants this. But I
In
do think it's
America, if
exciting.
certainly in this country, if you can get 2/3 of people to agree on anything, that's quite that's quite
In this
remarkable,
world,
right?
right? In
Yeah,
this world, that's a good outcome. Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that we wanted to talk about some is, and it is part of our obligation here in 2025 when we're talking about the workplace, is to talk a little bit about AI. And the report that we've talked about a couple times really dives into how AI is impacting, influencing, and may even change substantially the delivery of coaching, uh, support, and really mental health services and resources to employees, and the potential is amazing. Certainly, since it's AI, there's some things we've got to look out for, and some maybe guardrails we have to talk about. But maybe let's, before we get into that, Nick, maybe what you found is through the survey work that OnMind did, and as well as now what you're working on at OnMind with AI. I'd love for you to give us a little bit of your thoughts around how AI is going to manifest here in the mental health space, particularly around coaching, therapies, and how employers are going to be able to deliver services.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that there isn't a space in the world that isn't going to be transformed with AI, right? And
Yeah.
healthcare is no different. It- y- y- I've never met anyone who said these words. There's definitely enough clinicians and practitioners to meet the healthcare needs of the world,
Right, right.
right? Those words have never been put together. The reality is there's a chronic shortage globally of adequately qualified people to deliver timely care to people in need. Around the topic of mental health, be that in more reactive worlds or early intervention or more preventative, and actually we can't train enough people to be really good. So we're forced into this compromise where you can only ever have two of these things, these three things: scale, quality, and affordability.
Yeah.
And actually, what AI really helps us do is unlock that compromise, and it allows us to deliver timely care to people in a very a reliable, high quality, safe, affordable way. And I'm incredibly excited about that because we need more resource to be able to overcome the challenges we're facing in society around mental illness. And what's really interesting, and mental health more broadly, what's really interesting is that a few reports have now been talking, I think it was initially in the Harvard Business Review, about how the number one use case for generative AI is companionship and therapy. We're seeing, and it's one of the things that the report talks about, is 77% of respondents say they would likely use an AI coach to practice difficult conversations, for example. Like people, and we see. So we built an AI tool about 2 years ago now. We tested in beta, and we've been building it out. It's now live with millions of people around the world, and actually the engagement and usage is off the charts. Like much higher than industry best kind of stats, and the retention and engagement and impact is profound, and the qualitative feedback we get is incredible as well. So I'm really excited about the role of AI in this space, but it has to be built safely. I think the World Health Organization's given good guidelines on AI and healthcare. We're seeing the FDA and various other organizations look at regulation around this. It's got to be safe, it's got to be scientific, it's got to be ethical. Otherwise, it's a risk, and we really need to be careful around risk and mental health with AI.
Yeah, Nick, I think that's so true because it's one thing, right? Certainly in a workplace construct to say, let's use an AI tool to do something like, I don't know, schedule everybody's availability for a 7-person interview, right? Like,
Right.
or, you know, run a query to show you something like who's on staff today, something like that. Like, kind of low risk, not a huge problem if there's a little weird error, not sensitive data, certainly, right? It's just great at sort of the efficiency play, right? We're seeing lots of that going on right now in workplace tech. This kind of thing, like AI facilitated or AI powered, whatever the right word is, I don't know. Coaching, therapy, things like that. Certainly higher risk, more sensitive data, more. If it were to quote unquote get something wrong, potentially worse outcomes. So, do you guys have to really think very carefully about how these tools are being developed, how they're tested, and how you sort of monitor how they're actually working when a person comes to an AI, say, facilitated tool for some, hey, help me have this conversation that I'm about to have, which is going to be hard for me, that it's giving good advice and all of this. I'd love just not giving away all the secret sauce, if you will, but just how you're thinking about that.
It's so critical, because and the only people who should be building AI mental health tools are organizations that are very scientifically rigorous, have very high ethical standards, and build products in safe and responsible ways, because you can't get this wrong.
Right.
It's absolutely critical. So when we build AI tools at Unmind, it's always human centric. It's got safety guardrails. It's always driven by science. The product and the teams behind it always kind of have that learning mindset to continually improve it. It's secure and private. It's transparent with high accountability. Really, really critical stuff. And actually, if you take a step back and you think about, what does the WHO talk about? Well, it talks about making sure that any AI tools built in healthcare protect autonomy, promote well-being, safety, and public interest. They're transparent, explainable, making sure that there's high accountability, making sure they're inclusive and they're equitable, right? So that's super important with healthcare, and are ultimately responsive to development. So making sure you follow the guidelines is really key here. Otherwise, there is risk involved. But the truth is, there's also risk in not providing services to people in a timely way. And actually, what AI is going to help us do is transform that. There's no world in which AI is not coming to mental health. AI is definitely coming to mental health, and we need it. And the way I think about it is less like this is a risk, this is a challenge. This is, I think more of it is like this is going to enhance good practitioners to do better work. This is like the new member of the multidisciplinary team. Right. So like you have a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, whoever, and now we have an AI team member. But that AI team member needs to be well trained in the same way I expect the psychiatrist to be well trained. Right. But it's not a threat to jobs because it's actually an enhancement to roles if it's deployed well.
Well, right. I think it gets back to something you said a few minutes ago, Nick. There's not this glut of qualified practitioners out there in the world, right, to do some of this work, right? There's just a shortage, really, a shortage both of practitioners and then a glut of people who could probably use the services or would like to engage with the services. One of the things the report talks about a little bit is the capability of these AI tools to scale this kind of service delivery, right? And in so many organizations over the years, right, whether it's mental health therapy, or even if something as benign as executive coaching or leadership coaching or training or things like that, they just never were scaled, right? They just, because they were expensive, it was a lot of one-to-one, person-to-person kind of delivery. So organizations didn't roll them out en masse to 10,000 employees around the world, right? It just wasn't affordable, and there was no delivery mechanism to make it efficient enough, right? And AI, of course, what we're seeing across so many domains is really addressing those challenges as well.
Yeah, right. And it comes back a little bit. So you touched on there, but I just want to kind of state it as well, like that the global scalability. AI can speak so many languages. And when we go back to our earlier topic around stigma, a lot of the reasons people don't engage in healthcare, it's access, right? That's definitely a major piece, but it's also often like the anxiety of starting the conversation.
Hmm.
And AI is a really safe place to start a conversation in your native tongue if you want to build your confidence to then be able to go and speak to a human being. So I think that's really positive. But the other thing I think that's worth touching on here is that there's direct use of AI in healthcare and in workplace well-being. And that's how an employee will personally engage. And that could be conversational generative AI driven, or it could be helping be matched to therapists or using as a triage tool. But then there's also then the other kind of indirect piece, which is, how we're using it to educate leaders more effectively around this topic of mental health and wellbeing. Because a lot of leaders will, they've got a day job. And then sometimes people in their team are going to be struggling. And when that scenario appears, they need the tools right there and then to help them understand how to support their team member, not some training 6 months ago they did on the topic, right? That they've forgotten, right? So AI can also really be helpful to train leaders in how to support their people well. So it's the direct and indirect piece, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because we talked about the stigma a little bit. The other side of this, which we hear all the time in these workplace mental health discussions, is the lack of preparedness, lack of training, lack of resources for those managers. Right, so often, right, employees are the first time a particular issue might be raised is coming from an employee to their manager, right? Often, right, and what happens with these managers who are overworked, often underprepared, under-resourced, and now are facing something they probably were never really, prepared to do, right? It wasn't part of supervisory 101 school, right, in most organizations.
Did you see that report? I'm trying to remember whether it was last year or the year before, that I think maybe last year, that said that your manager has a greater impact on your well-being than your spouse or your physician.
I did. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
And that's super interesting. So the managers have a huge impact. And this is not surprising. I'm a really keen gardener. And you're a gardener?
Not as keen, but yes, I struggle with it.
You struggle with it. Well, maybe this will relate just as well then. So, if you take a seed of a plant and you put that seed in the wrong soil with the wrong water and the wrong light, that seed can't grow into the plant you want it to be, right? An employee in the workplace is not massively different. If you put an employee in a toxic environment with bad leaders, where they can't be well, they're not going to thrive into a top performing person, So we need our people to be in environments where they can flourish in the first place. And a leader has a huge role to play there,
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really interesting time right now in sort of workplace support, workplace mental health approaches, just because the tools are now beginning to catch up with the need, I would say, right? And the opportunity is really there for organizations to lean into this more heavily. It's a bit of an inclusion story as well, I think, right? And it made me think of that, Nick, when you talked about the ability to deliver resources, information, and services in really almost any language, right? And that's so powerful. I remember a few years ago, I was at an organization and they were manufacturing, I forget what they manufactured around here, and something, right, in the middle part of the country here. And they were talking to me about how, half of the employees at these manufacturing plants, their English was not their native language or their first language. Yeah. And they were rolling out some kind of an HR tool, on mobile phones, right, to do their checking in and checking out maybe, or their pay slips or something. And they needed to offer it in Spanish, essentially, right? Spanish was the main language. And once they did that, the use skyrocketed, right? And the employee satisfaction with the tool skyrocketed because now it was accessible and it was inclusive, right? And I think that's a huge story as well here in the mental health space.
It's so important. Do you know where we've seen a lot of impact as well with Nova, our AI tool, is in countries like India? Okay. Again, speaking local languages. For global organizations, it's a huge responsibility for a well-being and an HR team to deliver well-being programs for global teams. And it's really difficult to build one that is a strategy that is as high quality, let's say, in Canada or the US as it is in Brazil or South Africa or India or Thailand, whatever, Japan. And actually that one of the top issues has historically been language and cultural appropriateness. And I actually did my doctoral research in Nigeria, so cross-cultural psychology is a topic I'm super interested in. But I think that AI tools are going to really be very valuable there. And you see different levels of, one, because of the language topic that we've discussed, and then also just because, again, you can access these tools in a confidential way, in a non-judgmental way that makes it safer. And a lot of those countries I've mentioned have different levels of stigma around this topic. So where the stigma is higher, these kind of tools can be highly impactful.
I think that's a great point, Nick. I think one of the things that I thought was really powerful and valuable in the workplace mental health trends report that you guys published was kind of real simple, kind of but actionable steps, some recommendations that you came up with. I'd love for you to maybe just touch on a couple of those, right? Whether it's specifically around incorporating AI into your kind of toolkit, right, in the organization to help employees, or maybe even more generally to say, hey, you know, we had to get through the pandemic. We have to get through what's going on. Like we haven't really addressed mental health as directly as we need to, or we'd like to. Maybe we've got our EAP, and that's another story, right? And the report talks a lot about EAPs too. I don't necessarily want to dwell on that too much right now, but if you're saying, hey, the time is right for us to really lean into mental health. It's Mental Health Awareness Month here in the US, right? It's a good time to talk about it. What are some of the things that Unmind recommends for organizations to, I don't know, kickstart their initiatives here in this area?
Look, I think it's incredibly important when we're thinking about strategies around well-being. Firstly, for teams within organizations, let's say your well-being team, make sure you have a universally understood definition of what well-being means to you as an organization. I find a lot of organizations interchangeably may use wellness, well-being, mental health, without necessarily thinking about the connection between these topics,
Yeah.
So firstly, like get a clear definition of what the topic means to you as a business. Let's say it's well-being, and well-being is subjective happiness, and happiness has been shown to be a predictor of organizational performance. So let's say it's that. Then once you've got your definition, understand your population, and then think about, well, how can you make sure that the tools that you're delivering are both indirect in terms of helping set a cultural environment where people can flourish, but also direct, ensuring that people have frictionless access to care. So one of the recommendations you're alluding to is talking about removing barriers to access, for example.
Yeah.
And incorporating AI can be an absolute tool to do that. So making sure that you've got your indirect kind of services to help managers and help leaders, and then your direct services for your employees around the world. And then making sure that as an organization, you're measuring this and to understand what's the ROI, how are you knowing if your programs or your strategy is effective. And a lot of organizations have kind of engagement surveys, but they're often really lacking in data around this topic of mental health. So think about the measurement point. And then the final piece I'd really say is absolutely critical here is thinking about an exec sponsor. Who's your person as a senior leader that's going to really help to drive this with it as a well-being team? Because well-being teams should not be like isolated islands within organizations. They should have strong relationships to learning and development teams. They should have strong executive buy-in, ideally not just from the CHRO or CPO. But I think that's really critical. And then the wider drive, like if you were thinking, well, where's the focus? Again, it goes back to that data I was sharing earlier. 1% of a working population needs intervention for severe problems, 24% for moderate to mild, and 75% on promotion of well-being. So when you're thinking about your well-being strategy, your tools should be weighted towards the promotion of well-being, getting upstream. Not only is it the right thing to do from a performance perspective, but it's also going to ultimately ensure that your employees are more engaged and invested in day-to-day work because they're less distracted by their own mental health challenges they might be experiencing. But also, ultimately, if you're a US organization, your health claims will go down as well over time. So it's like there's a massive economic argument for it there as well. So that's at a high level.
I know. I appreciate that, Nick. And some of these recommendations are gone into in the report as well, and we'll link to that. And I think it's sad in some ways, but I get why we do it here. I think sometimes it's sad where we have to always kind of end the conversation, or not end it, but kind of end the argument with, oh, let's talk about, ROI and absenteeism and productivity and things like that. When I feel like, hey, we should really just be talking about, hey, this is really the right thing to do, right? Like to be a.
I totally agree with you.
But I know why you
think,
do it. Believe me,
yeah.
I understand.
But on a much simpler, because you're right, in a way, like it's so intuitively obvious. This not only is it ethically the right thing to do, is it from a humanity perspective, it's the right thing to do. But if you were the coach of a sports team and you had the choice the day before the final of fielding a team that was well or fielding a team that was unwell, you're going to field the well team.
Yeah.
Because you're more likely to win.
Yep.
Right? But
it's that simple.
Simple as that. It's that simple. If you're a leader in a business, field a well team.
Yeah.
You're more likely to win.
I love that. We're going to wrap that into like some of our show promotion. I think I love that analogy because it's one that people understand, and you can you can say, yeah, that of course that's what I would do. Right. Yeah. I love that, Nick. This has been a super conversation. I'm happy that we were able to get some time with you today in Mental Health Awareness Month, right? Which was important to us here. We're doing some other things around mental health awareness on our site. And, we love the topic. I'm a big believer. I finally, I was very cautioning myself, Nick, before the show started, not to try to use this podcast as my own personal, therapy session, and talk about my problems. But getting into, talking about my own, issues with mental health and getting into therapy in the last few years has been one of the biggest life changers for me too. And I've talked about it a little bit on the show in the past. And I'm so glad we're able to talk about these things much, much more openly, and so excited that we were able to get some time with you today.
Well, Steve, thank you for your leadership here and also for helping to bring this topic to awareness and promoting it. So really appreciate
that. So the website is unmind.com. We'll link to the report specifically. Nick, anything else you want to shout out or mention? We're heading into summer here in the U.S. Anything coming up you want to either unmind or otherwise you'd like to leave us with?
Look, I think get in touch. Like if you're as an organization wanting to really nail giving your people the right care at the right time, then you need to be thinking about what is the role of AI in your strategy. The Unmind Nova tool is absolutely groundbreaking. We'd love to talk with you about it. So please do get in touch.
Love it. All right. That's been great stuff. Nick, thank you so much again. Great to see you. Great to talk to you again. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to our friends. Remember to, dive in. We're going to publish all of our recent mental health resources in a collection on our website in the next week or so. And check that out at h3hr.com. Subscribe to the show and tell a friend and all that. So my name's Steve Boese. For our guest, Nick Taylor. We'll see you next time, and bye for now.